The morning sun barely penetrated the heavy curtains of Courtroom 3B in Hamilton County, Ohio. It was the kind of room that absorbed hope, dark wood paneling, worn leather chairs, and the lingering smell of old paper and anxiety. On this particular Tuesday morning in late September, the air felt heavier than usual. Emma Martinez sat on a booster seat between her grandmother and a victim advocate named Mrs. Chen. At 3 years old, she should have been in preschool, singing songs about colors and shapes, chasing butterflies and begging for extra cookies at snack time. Instead, she sat motionless in a pale blue dress her mother had carefully chosen that morning, clutching a tattered stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. The bunny's left ear hung by a thread, and its button eyes were scratched from countless nights of desperate hugging. Emma's eyes were open, but they stared at nothing. It was a look her parents had come to dread over the past 6 months, a vacancy that suggested their daughter was somewhere far away, locked in a place where words couldn't reach her. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Patricia Morrison entered. The courtroom shuffled to its feet. Emma didn't move. Her grandmother, Rosa Martinez, gently placed a hand on the child's shoulder but didn't force her to stand. What did court protocol matter when your granddaughter had forgotten how to speak? Rosa's eyes were red-rimmed from another sleepless night. She'd raised 3 children of her own and had thought she'd seen everything. But nothing prepared her for watching Emma retreat into silence after that horrible March night. The little girl who once sang, "Let It Go" at the top of her lungs while dancing in the living room, who asked, "Why?" about everything under the sun, who giggled at the simplest jokes, that Emma had vanished. In the gallery, Maria and Carlos Martinez sat rigidly in the 3rd row. Maria's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Carlos stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, fighting the rage that had become his constant companion. They had argued that morning about whether bringing Emma to court was the right decision. "She's not ready," Maria had whispered in their kitchen at dawn, watching Emma mechanically eat her cereal without tasting it. "She's the only witness," Carlos had replied, his voice breaking. "If she doesn't testify, he walks free." Now, watching their baby girl sit like a tiny statue in that enormous courtroom, they both wondered if they'd made a terrible mistake. Assistant District Attorney James Thornton stood, adjusting his tie nervously. He was 43 years old, had prosecuted over 200 cases, and had never felt more unprepared than he did at this moment. His entire case rested on the shoulders of a traumatized 3-year-old who hadn't spoken since the night in question. "Your Honor," Thornton began, his voice steady despite the uncertainty churning in his gut. "The state calls this case knowing its unusual circumstances. Emma Martinez is our only eyewitness to the home invasion that occurred on March 14th at 247 Maple Street. While the defendant's fingerprints were found at the scene, and stolen property was recovered from his vehicle, we need Emma's testimony to establish that Marcus Webb was the intruder she saw that night." Defense attorney Robert Kleinman rose slowly, a thin smile playing at his lips. He was a public defender who'd learned to work every angle, and he'd been handed a gift with this case. A silent 3-year-old witness. The case would collapse like a house of cards. "Your Honor," Kleinman drawled, his confidence evident, "the defense moves to dismiss these charges. The prosecution has rested its case on the testimony of a child who, by their own admission, has not spoken in 6 months. She's 3 years old, Your Honor. Even if she could speak, her testimony would be highly questionable. Children that age have vivid imaginations. They confuse dreams with reality. They can't accurately perceive time or reliably identify faces. And this particular child has been through significant trauma, which we all sympathize with, but which makes her even less reliable as a witness." Judge Morrison's eyes moved to Emma, and her expression softened slightly. She'd been on the bench for 19 years and had seen countless children come through her courtroom, victims of abuse, witnesses to violence, kids caught in custody battles. But something about this little girl's emptiness struck her deeply. "Mr. Thornton," the judge said carefully. "What makes you believe Emma will testify today?" "According to the psychological evaluation filed with the court, she hasn't spoken a single word since the night of the incident. Not to her parents, not to her therapist, not even to her friends." "What's changed?" Thornton felt his case slipping away. "Your Honor, we have Dr. Linda Chen, a child psychologist specializing in trauma, who believes that in the right environment with the proper support, Emma may be able to communicate what she witnessed." "May be able to," Kleinman interjected. "Your Honor, may be is not a foundation for testimony. This is a waste of the court's time and resources." Emma's fingers tightened around her rabbit. In the gallery, Maria began to cry silently, and Carlos put his arm around her, though his own eyes were wet. The judge looked at Emma again, really looked at her. The child was somewhere else entirely, lost in whatever dark memory held her prisoner. Morrison had grandchildren of her own. She knew the sound of a 3-year-old's laughter, the endless questions, the boundless energy. This child was a ghost of what she should be. "I'm inclined to agree with the defense," Judge Morrison said slowly, and the Martinez family's hearts plummeted. "However," the courtroom doors opened suddenly, interrupting her. Every head turned as Detective Sarah Mason entered, and she wasn't alone. Padding beside her on a leather leash was a golden retriever, his coat gleaming in the fluorescent lights, wearing an official-looking vest with a badge embroidered on it. "What in the world?" Kleinman began. For the first time that morning, Emma's head moved, just slightly, just enough to see the dog. And in that moment, though no one knew it yet, everything was about to change. Detective Sarah Mason had been a police officer for 12 years, but she still felt a flutter of nerves as she pushed open the courtroom doors. Bailey, her 4-year-old golden retriever partner, sensed her tension immediately. His warm brown eyes flicked up to her face, and his tail gave a reassuring wag as if to say, "I've got this." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Heads turned, eyebrows raised, and the bailiff stood up abruptly, clearly unsure if he should intervene. A dog in the courtroom. This was Hamilton County, Ohio, not some progressive California courthouse where therapy animals were commonplace. "Your Honor," Mason said, her voice calm and professional despite the attention, "I apologize for the interruption. I'm Detective Sarah Mason, lead investigator on the Martinez case. This is Bailey, my K-9 partner. He's a certified courthouse facility dog and trauma therapy animal." Judge Morrison's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. In nearly 2 decades on the bench, she'd allowed emotional support animals in chambers during private meetings, but never in open court during proceedings. "Detective Mason, while I appreciate your dedication to this case, I'm not sure this is." "Objection, Your Honor." Robert Kleinman shot to his feet so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "This is absolutely inappropriate. The prosecution is trying to manipulate the jury's emotions with a cute dog. It's a circus trick, nothing more. This is a courtroom, not a pet store." Mason remained standing calmly, Bailey sitting perfectly at attention beside her. She'd expected this reaction. "Your Honor, if I may explain, Bailey is not here as a prop or emotional manipulation. He's a working police dog, certified by Courthouse Dogs Foundation, and trained specifically for cases involving child witnesses with severe trauma. He's been through over 300 hours of specialized training." "That's irrelevant," Kleinman pressed, his face reddening. "Dogs have no place in legal proceedings. This sets a dangerous precedent. What's next? Cats, parrots? Where does it end?" Assistant District Attorney James Thornton stood, finally finding solid ground. "Your Honor, 37 states now allow courthouse facility dogs during testimony from vulnerable witnesses, particularly children. Ohio passed legislation 2 years ago permitting this exact practice. Bailey has assisted in 9 cases across 3 counties. He's not a pet. He's a professional resource for traumatized witnesses who cannot otherwise testify." Judge Morrison leaned back in her chair, processing this information. She glanced at Emma Martinez, who for the first time that morning showed a spark of interest. The child's vacant stare had shifted. Her eyes were following the golden retriever's every movement. "Detective Mason," the judge said carefully, "explain to me how this works, and please be specific." Mason stepped forward, Bailey moving with her in perfect synchronization. "Your Honor," Bailey provides what's called non-judgmental companionship to witnesses experiencing severe anxiety or trauma-induced mutism. His presence has been scientifically proven to lower cortisol levels, reduce heart rate, and create a sense of safety. For children like Emma who have experienced trauma, the simple act of touching or being near a therapy dog can help them access memories and emotions they've otherwise suppressed. "This is pseudoscience," Kleinman protested. "Next, they'll want to bring in crystals and aromatherapy candles." "It's peer-reviewed science, actually," Thornton interjected, pulling out a folder. "I have studies from Johns Hopkins, Yale, and the University of California documenting the effectiveness of courthouse facility dogs. The American Psychological Association endorses their use. The National District Attorneys Association recommends them for cases involving child witnesses." Judge Morrison held up her hand for silence. The courtroom fell quiet except for the soft sound of Bailey's breathing. "Mr. Kleinman, I understand your concerns. However, I'm also looking at a 3-year-old child who hasn't spoken in 6 months. If there's even a possibility that this animal could help her communicate, I'm willing to explore it." "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "Many things about this case are irregular, Counselor," Morrison cut him off. "A toddler witnessed a violent crime. She's been psychologically damaged. Standard procedures haven't worked. I'm willing to try something different." She paused, her gaze stern. "However, Detective Mason, the dog must remain calm and quiet. Any disruption and he's removed immediately." "Understood." "Absolutely, Your Honor. Bailey has never made a sound during court proceedings." "And Mr. Kleinman," the judge continued, "your objection is noted for the record. If you believe this prejudices your client's right to a fair trial, you may raise it on appeal. But for now, the dog stays." Kleinman sat down heavily, shaking his head. He'd lost this round, but he wasn't finished. There was still no guarantee the child would speak, dog or no dog. Mason led Bailey to a spot near the witness area, not too close to Emma but within her line of sight. As the golden retriever settled onto the floor, his tail sweeping in a gentle arc, something remarkable happened. Emma's head turned fully toward the dog. Her lips, which had been pressed in a tight line for 6 months, parted slightly. Her grandmother Rosa noticed immediately and squeezed the victim advocate's arm, afraid to hope. Bailey, as if sensing the weight of the moment, laid his head on his paws and closed his eyes slightly, a picture of peace and gentleness. He wasn't looking at Emma, wasn't approaching her, wasn't doing anything threatening. He was simply being present. Carlos Martinez leaned forward in his seat, his heart pounding. His daughter's face, for the first time in half a year, showed something other than emptiness. It wasn't quite recognition, not yet, but it was awareness. It was interest. It was a crack in the wall she'd built around herself. Mason took her seat in the gallery, keeping Bailey's leash loose. She'd learned through experience that therapy dogs worked best when they weren't forced on anyone. The child needed to come to Bailey in her own time, in her own way. Judge Morrison cleared her throat, trying to regain control of her courtroom and her emotions. "Mr. Thornton, let's proceed with the evidence presentation. We'll see if Emma is able to participate as we go." But everyone in that courtroom, from the hardened defense attorney to the skeptical bailiff, was watching the little girl in the blue dress. And for the first time since that terrible March night, Emma Martinez looked like she might be present in the room. Bailey's tail thumped once against the floor. The sound echoed like a heartbeat. Assistant District Attorney James Thornton approached the evidence table with the weight of the world on his shoulders. He'd spent countless sleepless nights preparing for this moment, knowing that every word mattered, every piece of evidence had to tell a story that Emma couldn't yet speak aloud. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice carrying the gravity of the moment. On the night of March 14th, the Martinez family's world was shattered. What should have been an ordinary Tuesday evening became a nightmare that has left permanent scars on a 3-year-old child. He clicked a remote, and images appeared on the courtroom's display screen. The first photograph showed 247 Maple Street, a modest ranch-style home with a cheerful yellow door and flower boxes in the windows. It looked like a place where happy families lived, where children played in the yard and neighbors waved to each other. The next image destroyed that illusion. The same house, but now with a shattered back window, glass glittering across the kitchen floor like scattered diamonds. Crime scene tape stretched across the doorway. Maria Martinez made a small sound in the gallery, remembering the phone call she'd received that night while working her shift at the hospital. Carlos's hand found hers, their fingers interlocking with the desperate grip of two people drowning together. At approximately 8:47 p.m., Marcus Webb, Thornton gestured toward the defendant, broke into the Martinez home through this kitchen window. Inside were 13-year-old Lily Portman, the babysitter, and Emma Martinez, who should have been safely asleep in her bed. Marcus Webb sat at the defense table with studied indifference, his muscular frame relaxed, his face showing none of the concern an innocent man might display. At 32, he'd been in and out of the system since he was 16. This wasn't his first burglary charge, and he'd learned long ago that juries looked for weakness. He wouldn't give them any. Thornton displayed the next evidence photo, Emma's bedroom. Pink walls decorated with butterfly stickers, a small bed with a unicorn comforter, stuffed animals arranged on shelves. And in the corner, the closet door stood open, revealing the small space where Emma had hidden. Emma was supposed to be the safest she could be, Thornton continued, his voice thick with emotion he didn't try to hide. In her own home, in her own bedroom, protected by locked doors and an attentive babysitter. But Marcus Webb didn't care about that little girl's safety. He didn't care that his actions would traumatize a child. He cared about one thing, stealing whatever he could get his hands on. Dr. Linda Chen sat in the front row of the gallery, her professional notebook open on her lap. She'd been Emma's therapist since 2 days after the incident, and she'd documented every silent session, every failed breakthrough, every heartbreaking moment when Emma's parents had begged their daughter to just say something, anything. The prosecutor called his first witness, Officer David Chen, first responder to the scene. The middle-aged policeman took the stand, his uniform pressed and perfect, but his eyes betrayed the emotional toll of that night. "Officer Chen, please describe what you encountered when you arrived at 247 Maple Street." Chen's voice was steady but haunted. "We received a 911 call from the babysitter at 8:52 p.m. She was hysterical, screaming that someone had broken in. When we arrived 3 minutes later, we found the back window shattered, the house ransacked. The babysitter, Lily Portman, was on the front lawn, crying and bleeding from a cut on her arm where she'd fallen on broken glass trying to escape. And Emma. Emma was missing initially. We searched the house and found her in her bedroom closet, wedged into the back corner behind her winter coats." Chen's voice cracked slightly. She was awake. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't crying. She wasn't making any sound at all. It was like she disappeared into herself. In her booster seat, Emma remained motionless, but her breathing had quickened. Her grandmother Rosa noticed and gently rubbed the child's back, whispering soothing Spanish words that Emma showed no sign of hearing. But Bailey noticed. The golden retriever's ears perked up slightly, and he shifted his position, angling himself so Emma could see him more clearly if she chose to look. Thornton introduced evidence methodically, photographs of the ransacked living room, where Maria's jewelry box had been taken from the mantel. The broken window with clear tool marks showing forced entry, and most damning, fingerprint analysis. Officer Chen, whose fingerprints were found on the window frame and on the jewelry box later recovered from the defendant's vehicle. Marcus Webb's fingerprints were a perfect match, sir. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Claimant objected. Circumstantial, Your Honor. My client admits he'd been to that house 2 weeks prior for a yard sale. The homeowners can verify this. It was true. The Martinez family had held a yard sale, and Webb had purchased an old lamp for $5. It was the perfect explanation for his fingerprints being in the house, except for one critical detail. Thornton pulled out a DNA analysis report. Your Honor, in addition to fingerprints, we found blood evidence. When Marcus Webb broke the window, he cut his hand on the glass. That blood was matched to the defendant with 99.9% certainty. Webb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That was the evidence he couldn't explain away. Claimant leaned over to whisper urgently to his client, but Webb shook his head minutely. He'd stick to his story. He'd never entered that house the night of the break-in. Dr. Chen took the stand next, her credentials establishing her as an expert in childhood trauma and selective mutism. Thornton handled her testimony with care, knowing the jury needed to understand why Emma couldn't speak. Dr. Chen, in your professional opinion, what caused Emma's mutism? Severe psychological trauma, Dr. Chen replied, her voice clinical but compassionate. Emma witnessed a violent intrusion into her safe space. She heard the window breaking, heard her babysitter screaming, saw a threatening adult male in her home. For a 3-year-old brain, this creates a state of overwhelming fear. Sometimes, the psyche protects itself by shutting down the ability to communicate. It's called trauma-induced selective mutism. Can she recover? With proper therapy and support, yes, but the timeline is unpredictable. Some children recover in weeks, others take years, and some, Dr. Chen paused, choosing her words carefully, some carry the silence their entire lives. Maria Martinez broke down sobbing in the gallery. The thought of her daughter never speaking again was unbearable. Carlos held her tightly, his own tears falling silently. Emma's small hand moved almost imperceptibly, her fingers loosening their death grip on the tattered rabbit for the first time all morning. Bailey, still lying quietly near the witness area, seemed to sense the shift. His tail gave one gentle sweep across the floor. Thornton approached the bench. Your Honor, the physical evidence establishes that Marcus Webb broke into the Martinez home, but without Emma's testimony identifying him as the intruder she saw, without her confirming he was the man who terrorized her that night, we cannot prove he committed this specific crime on this specific date. Judge Morrison looked at the defense table where Marcus Webb sat with that infuriating calm expression. Then she looked at Emma, still silent, still broken, still trapped in that terrible night. The court will take a 15-minute recess, Morrison announced. When we return, we'll address whether Emma Martinez can provide testimony. As people stood to stretch, no one noticed Emma's eyes drift back to Bailey. No one saw the almost imperceptible change in her expression, a softness replacing the vacancy, a recognition forming in the depths of her trauma. No one except Detective Sarah Mason, who'd been watching both the child and her dog with practiced attention. The breakthrough was coming. Mason could feel it in her bones. The 15-minute recess felt like an eternity. In the courthouse hallway, Maria Martinez splashed cold water on her face in the bathroom while Rosa held Emma's hand, trying to coax any reaction from the child. Carlos paced the corridor like a caged animal, his footsteps echoing off the marble floors. None of them spoke. What was there to say? Their daughter was locked away somewhere they couldn't reach. Detective Sarah Mason sat on a bench with Bailey's head resting on her knee. She stroked his soft ears absently, her mind drifting to the other children Bailey had helped. There was 7-year-old Michael, who'd witnessed his father's murder. 6-year-old Sophia, victim of unspeakable abuse. 4-year-old twins who'd survived a house fire that killed their mother. In each case, Bailey had been the key that unlocked their voices. "We need you today, buddy," Mason whispered. "That little girl needs you." Bailey's tail thumped twice against the floor, as if he understood the assignment. When the bailiff called everyone back, the atmosphere in Courtroom 3B had shifted. The jury members filed in with solemn faces, some glancing at Emma with visible sympathy. Even the court reporter seemed more emotionally invested, her fingers poised over her stenography machine with unusual intensity. Judge Morrison took her seat and surveyed the room. "Mr. Thornton, are you prepared to call Emma Martinez to testify?" Thornton stood, his throat tight. This was the moment everything hinged on. "Your Honor, given Emma's condition, I'd like to request that Dr. Chen be allowed to remain beside her during any attempt at testimony, and that Bailey be positioned where Emma can see him." "Objection," Kleinman said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Even he seemed to recognize that objecting to a therapy dog helping a traumatized 3-year-old would make him look heartless to the jury. "Overruled," Morrison said quickly. "Detective Mason, please position Bailey accordingly." Mason stood, giving Bailey's leash a gentle tug. The golden retriever rose gracefully and walked with her toward the witness area. As they moved, Bailey's attention seemed to fix on something across the room, a spot of sunlight streaming through the high windows. He paused mid-step, turned his head toward the light, and then, in a movement so natural it seemed choreographed by fate itself, he yawned. It was a big, luxurious dog yawn, the kind that showed all his teeth and made his whole body stretch. His front paws extended forward, his back arched, and for a moment he looked utterly content and peaceful. The movement was so ordinary, so beautifully mundane, that several people in the courtroom smiled despite themselves. But for Emma Martinez, that yawn was a key turning in a lock. Her eyes, which had been staring vacantly at her lap, suddenly snapped up. They followed Bailey's movement with laser focus, tracking the arch of his back, the stretch of his paws, the way his golden fur caught the sunlight. Her small body went rigid, and her grandmother felt it immediately. "Emma," Rosa whispered, afraid to hope. Emma's right hand moved. Slowly, as if fighting through deep water, it lifted from her lap. Her arm extended, trembling with effort, her tiny index finger pointing directly at Bailey. The movement was so unexpected, so unprecedented, that a hush fell over the courtroom like a blanket of snow. Every single person froze, the prosecutor mid-breath, the defense attorney with his pen hovering over his notepad, the jury collectively leaning forward. Even Judge Morrison's hand stopped midway to her gavel. Emma's lips began to move. No sound came at first, just the ghost of words forming. Rosa's hand flew to her mouth, tears already streaming. In the gallery, Maria half stood from her seat, Carlos pulling her back down while gripping her hand so tightly his knuckles went white. Then, like the first crack in a frozen river at spring's arrival, sound emerged. "That's," Emma's voice was barely a whisper, rusty from 6 months of silence, "that's the good dog." The courtroom erupted in gasps. The court reporter's fingers flew across her machine. One jury member openly cried, but Dr. Chen, with years of training keeping her composed, gently touched Emma's shoulder. "Yes, sweetheart," Dr. Chen said softly. "That's Bailey. Do you remember Bailey?" Emma's finger remained pointing, but now her whole body was trembling. Memories were flooding back, crashing through whatever walls her mind had built to protect itself. Her breathing came faster, but she didn't retreat back into silence. "The good dog was there," Emma said, her voice growing slightly stronger, though it still sounded fragile as glass. "When the bad man came." Maria Martinez let out a sob so loud the bailiff didn't even try to silence her. Carlos had his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Their baby was speaking. After 6 months of devastating silence, their daughter was speaking. Bailey, sensing the emotional weight of the moment with the intuition only dogs possess, moved slowly toward Emma. Mason let the leash go slack, trusting her partner's training. The golden retriever approached with his head lowered, non-threatening, his tail giving small, gentle wags. Emma watched him come closer, and as he did, more words tumbled out like water through a broken dam. The good dog helped me when I was scared. In the dark closet, the good dog came. Dr. Chen met Thornton's eyes across the courtroom, and a silent understanding passed between them. Emma was remembering the night of the break-in, but she was starting with the aftermath, with Bailey finding her in the closet after Marcus Webb had fled. It was the safe memory, the healing memory. The trauma would come next, but she was building toward it. Bailey reached Emma's chair and sat down, perfectly still except for his tail. Emma's hand, still trembling, reached out tentatively and touched the top of his head. The golden fur was warm and soft under her fingers, and something in that touch seemed to anchor her to reality. "He stayed with me," Emma whispered, now looking directly at Bailey instead of just pointing. "Until Mommy came. The good dog didn't leave me alone." Mason felt tears prick her own eyes. She'd been there that night, had watched Bailey crawl into that closet where Emma was hiding, had seen the frightened child bury her face in the dog's fur while they waited for her parents to arrive. Bailey had done his job perfectly then, providing silent comfort when human words couldn't penetrate the child's terror. And now Bailey was doing his job again, giving Emma the courage to speak. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her voice gentle as a grandmother's. "Emma, honey, can you tell us about the bad man you mentioned? Can you tell us what happened before the good dog came?" Emma's fingers tangled in Bailey's fur, gripping tightly. Her eyes squeezed shut for a moment, and everyone held their breath, terrified she would retreat back into silence. But then Emma's eyes opened again, and though they were wet with tears, they were focused, present here. "The bad man broke our house," Emma said, her small voice carrying through the silent courtroom like a bell. "He had angry eyes." Marcus Webb shifted uncomfortably in his chair for the first time all day. The silence had finally, miraculously broken. Dr. Linda Chen moved slowly, deliberately, positioning herself beside Emma's chair without creating any sense of pressure or urgency. She'd spent 6 months waiting for this moment, conducting countless silent therapy sessions where Emma had simply stared at walls, colored without speaking, or sat frozen like a statue. Now, with Bailey's warm presence beside the little girl, the impossible was happening. "Emma," Dr. Chen said, her voice as soft as a lullaby, "you're doing so well, sweetheart. You said the bad man broke your house. Can you tell us more about that night? Take your time. Bailey is right here with you." Emma's small hand remained buried deep in Bailey's golden fur, her fingers opening and closing rhythmically, drawing strength from each touch. Her eyes stayed fixed on the therapy dog, as if he were a lifeline keeping her from drowning in the terrible memories. "It was bedtime," Emma began, her voice small but steady. "Lily was reading me a story, the princess one with the dragon." Assistant District Attorney Thornton remained perfectly still, afraid that any movement might shatter this fragile moment. The jury leaned forward collectively, 12 faces showing a mixture of hope and heartbreak. "We heard a loud crash," Emma continued, and her body trembled. Bailey immediately shifted, pressing closer against her leg. "Like when Daddy dropped the big plates at Christmas, but louder, scary loud." In the gallery, Maria remembered that Christmas morning when Carlos had stumbled carrying the china plates and they'd shattered across the kitchen floor. Emma had cried then, not from fear, but from the shock of the sudden noise. Now that same daughter was recalling a sound 100 times worse. "Lily told me to hide," Emma said, tears starting to roll down her cheeks. "She said, 'Quick, Emma, hide in your closet right now.'" Her voice was really scared. "Lily's never scared. She's big." Lily Portman, now 14 and sitting in the gallery with her parents, wiped her own eyes. She'd testified the previous day, describing the terror of seeing a man climb through the broken kitchen window while she was washing dishes. She'd screamed, run to get Emma, and barely had time to hide the child before Marcus Webb appeared in the hallway. "I got in my closet," Emma whispered. "Behind my winter coats, the purple one Grammy bought me. It smells like Grammy's house." Rosa Martinez pressed a tissue to her mouth, muffling a sob. That purple coat, Emma had loved it so much she'd worn it even in warm weather until the break-in. Now it sat in a donation bag, untouched, because Emma refused to go near it. "Then I heard Lily screaming," Emma said, and her voice cracked. "She was yelling, 'Get out, get out!' And there were big footsteps, bang, bang, bang on the floor, heavy like a giant." Dr. Chen nodded encouragingly. "You were very brave hiding in that closet, Emma. What happened next?" Emma's breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Bailey sensed the rising panic and did something remarkable. He lifted his head and gently placed his chin on Emma's knee, a gesture of pure comfort, of solidarity. The weight of his head seemed to ground her. "I heard drawers opening," Emma said, her words coming faster now as if she needed to get them out before they choked her. "Bang, crash, bang, things breaking. Mommy's music box, I heard it play and then stop. And footsteps coming closer, coming to my room." The courtroom was so silent that the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed deafening. Marcus Webb stared at the defense table, his jaw clenched, refusing to look at the child he'd terrorized. "I made myself really small," Emma whispered. "Like when we play hide and seek, but for real. I held my breath. I put my hands over my ears, but I could still hear. The bad man came in my room. I could see his feet under my closet door. Big black shoes, dirty shoes on my princess rug." Thornton's hands gripped the prosecution table. This was it. This was the testimony that would seal the case. "I heard him opening my drawers," Emma continued, her voice shaking. "He said a bad word, the one Daddy says when he hits his thumb with the hammer, then more footsteps, more crashing. I was so scared, I thought he would find me." "Did you see the bad man, Emma?" Dr. Chen asked gently. "Did you see what he looked like?" Emma nodded slowly, her eyes squeezing shut as the memory played behind her eyelids. "I peeked through the coats, just a tiny bit. I had to know where he was, and I saw him." The jury was frozen. Every eye in the courtroom fixed on this brave little girl who was reliving her nightmare. "He was big," Emma said, "bigger than Daddy. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood up, but I saw his face when he turned toward the light. He had angry eyes, mean eyes, like the wolf in Red Riding Hood but real, and he had scratches on his neck, red scratches." Thornton glanced at the evidence photos. Marcus Webb had indeed had fresh scratches on his neck when arrested. He'd claimed they were from a construction job, but the timeline didn't match. "He had a bag," Emma continued, her voice barely audible now. "A big black bag. He was putting things in it. Mommy's jewelry box, the silver picture frame from her dresser, my butterfly nightlight. He took that too." Maria gasped. The butterfly nightlight, they'd never found it, never included it in the list of stolen items because Emma hadn't been able to tell them it was missing. "Then he left," Emma said, and suddenly her whole body sagged with relief at reaching this part of the story. "I heard the back door slam. I heard Lily still crying somewhere. And then, silence, just silence, and my heart going boom, boom, boom so loud." Bailey shifted again, laying his head fully in Emma's lap now, and she wrapped both arms around his neck like he was the only solid thing in a world that had tilted sideways. "I stayed in the closet," Emma whispered into Bailey's fur. "I don't know for how long, forever maybe. Then I heard sirens, red and blue lights coming through my window, more footsteps but different, radio sounds, police sounds. Someone said clear, really loud." Dr. Chen's professional composure was cracking, tears forming in her eyes despite her training. "And that's when Bailey found you." Emma nodded, a tiny smile breaking through her tears, the first smile anyone had seen from her in 6 months. The closet door opened. I thought maybe the bad man came back, but it was a lady police officer, and she said, "It's okay, honey, you're safe now." And then Bailey came. Emma looked up from the dog to find Detective Mason in the courtroom, and recognition lit her face. You were the nice police lady." Mason nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. "Bailey crawled into my closet," Emma said, wonder creeping into her voice as she remembered. "He was so warm, so soft. He licked my face and it tickled. He laid down right next to me and he stayed there, even when other police came, even when they wanted to look at me. Bailey stayed right there until Mommy and Daddy came running in." Carlos Martinez was openly weeping now, remembering how they'd found their daughter, curled up in that closet with a golden retriever, the only thing that had kept her from completely shattering. "Bailey made me feel safe," Emma said simply. "The bad man was gone, but I was still so scared. But Bailey showed me that good things still existed, that not everything was scary." Judge Morrison wiped her own eyes discreetly. In 20 years on the bench, she'd never witnessed anything quite like this. "Emma," Thornton said gently, approaching but keeping his distance, "you've been so incredibly brave. Thank you for telling us about that night. The good dog helped you, and now you're helping us. You're helping make sure the bad man can't scare any other little girls." Emma looked at the prosecutor, then at Bailey, then at her grandmother. And for the first time in 6 months, she spoke in a voice that sounded almost like her old self, the chatty, curious little girl she'd been before that March night. "I don't want other kids to be scared like me," Emma said. "Bailey helped me, so I want to help too." The courtroom erupted in emotion, stifled sobs, sniffles, even the bailiff wiping his eyes. But through it all, one person remained unmoved. Marcus Webb sat at the defense table, his face pale, knowing that this testimony had sealed his fate. The moment had arrived, the moment that would determine whether justice would be served or whether Marcus Webb would walk free. Assistant District Attorney James Thornton approached the bench with a manila folder, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Inside were 6 photographs, carefully selected to create a fair and legal photo lineup. "Your Honor," Thornton said, "with the court's permission, I'd like to show Emma a series of photographs. Standard identification procedure." Defense attorney Robert Kleinman rose, but his objection died in his throat. He'd been planning to argue that a 3-year-old couldn't reliably identify anyone, that children were suggestible, that the whole thing was a farce. But watching Emma cling to Bailey while recounting her trauma, watching the jury's faces soften with sympathy and belief, he knew any aggressive objection would only hurt his client further. "No objection," Kleinman said quietly, surprising everyone including Marcus Webb, who shot his attorney a sharp look of betrayal. Judge Morrison nodded. "Proceed carefully, Mr. Thornton. Dr. Chen, please assist." Dr. Chen knelt beside Emma's chair, positioning herself so she wouldn't block Emma's view of Bailey. The golden retriever remained perfectly still in Emma's lap, his warm weight a constant reassurance. "Emma, sweetheart," Dr. Chen said gently, "Mr. Thornton is going to show you some pictures of different men. I want you to look at each one carefully. If you see the bad man who came into your house that night, you can point to him. If you don't see him, that's okay too. You just tell us the truth about what you see. Okay?" Emma nodded slowly, her fingers still tangled in Bailey's fur. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was a determination in them now, a strength that had been buried under 6 months of silence. Thornton opened the folder and removed 6 8x10 photographs, laying them out on a wooden board designed for this purpose. Each photo showed a man's face, similar ages, similar builds, similar coloring. Marcus Webb was in position number 4, but there was no way for Emma to know that. No names, no numbers visible to her, just 6 faces staring back from the glossy paper. The courtroom held its collective breath. 12 jury members leaned forward. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her machine. In the gallery, Maria Martinez gripped her rosary so tightly the beads bit into her palm. Carlos had his arm around her shoulders, both of them frozen in desperate hope. Emma studied the first photograph. A man with a beard, dark hair, heavy-set features. She shook her head slightly and moved on. The second photograph showed a thinner man, angular face, intense eyes. Again, Emma's small head moved from side to side. No, not him. The third photograph drew a longer look. Similar build to Marcus Webb, similar coloring. Emma stared at it for what felt like an eternity. Kleinman felt a flutter of hope. Maybe the child couldn't actually identify his client. Maybe this whole thing would fall apart. But then Emma moved to the fourth photograph, and everything changed. Her entire body went rigid. Her breathing stopped completely for a moment, then came back in rapid, shallow gasps. Bailey immediately responded, lifting his head from her lap and pressing his nose against her chest, a calming technique he'd been trained to perform. "That's him," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's the bad man." But Thornton needed more. He needed absolute clarity for the record. "Emma, can you point to the photograph for us? Show everyone which one you mean." Emma's hand trembled as she lifted it. Her finger extended, shaking violently, but there was no doubt about where it pointed. Photograph number 4. Marcus Webb's booking photo, taken 3 days after the break-in when police had finally tracked him down. "Him," Emma said, her voice growing stronger even as tears streamed down her face. "The bad man with angry eyes, that's him." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The jury members looked from Emma to Webb and back again. The defendant sat frozen, his face draining of color. All his calculated indifference crumbled in an instant. "Let the record show," Judge Morrison said firmly, her voice cutting through the noise, "that the witness has identified photograph number 4, which depicts the defendant Marcus Webb." But Emma wasn't finished. 6 months of suppressed trauma, 6 months of locked-away memories, came pouring out in a torrent of words. "He took Mommy's jewelry box," Emma said, still pointing, her voice rising. "The shiny one Daddy gave her for their anniversary, and he said bad words. Really bad words I'm not supposed to say. And he had those scratches on his neck, right there." She gestured to her own neck. "Red scratches like from a cat but bigger." Thornton glanced at the evidence photos again. The scratches Webb had claimed came from construction work were visible in his arrest photo, 4 parallel lines on the right side of his neck. "And his shoes," Emma continued, the memories cascading now that the dam had broken. "Big black boots with yellow on the bottom. I saw them under my closet door. They stepped on my princess rug, the one Grammy made me with the castle on it." Rosa gasped. She'd crocheted that rug herself, spending months on it for Emma's 2nd birthday. They'd thrown it away after the break-in because it had been damaged, and because Emma had screamed when they tried to put it back in her room. "He smelled bad too," Emma added, wrinkling her nose at the memory. "Like cigarettes and that stuff Daddy uses to clean the garage, the stinky stuff in the red can." "Paint thinner," Carlos whispered to Maria. The police report had noted that items smelling of paint thinner were found in Webb's vehicle. He'd been painting a stolen fence earlier that day. Dr. Chen gently guided Emma through more details, each one corroborating evidence the prosecution had already presented. The black duffel bag Webb had been carrying, the specific jewelry pieces taken, the route he'd taken through the house, kitchen to living room to master bedroom to Emma's room to back door. But it was Emma's next statement that delivered the final, devastating blow to Webb's defense. "I remember his voice too," Emma said quietly, looking directly at Marcus Webb for the first time. The defendant's eyes widened and he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "When he was in my room looking in my drawers, he talked to himself. He said—" Emma paused and Dr. Chen encouraged her to continue. "He said, 'Come on, where's the good stuff? These people gotta have cash somewhere.' That's what he said, in that voice." Kleinman shot to his feet. "Your Honor, The witness is 3 years old. Voice identification from a traumatized child 6 months after the fact. Is completely admissible. Judge Morrison cut him off. The witness has demonstrated remarkable recall of specific details that match the physical evidence. Her testimony stands. Marcus Webb's hands clenched into fists on the table. His carefully constructed alibi, that he'd been at a friend's house watching basketball that night, was crumbling. His explanation for the fingerprints, the yard sale weeks earlier, couldn't account for his blood at the scene. And now a 3-year-old child was describing him, his actions, his words, with devastating accuracy. Emma, exhausted from reliving her nightmare, slumped against her grandmother. But before Dr. Chen could help her down from the witness chair, Emma looked at Bailey one more time. "Thank you for helping me be brave," she whispered to the dog, kissing the top of his golden head. Bailey's tail wagged softly, and in that simple gesture, everyone in the courtroom understood something profound. Sometimes justice needs more than evidence and arguments. Sometimes it needs compassion, patience, and a therapy dog who knows exactly when a broken child is ready to speak. Thornton straightened his tie and looked at the jury. "The prosecution rests, Your Honor." In the gallery, Maria and Carlos held each other, their daughter's voice, silent for so long, still echoing in their ears. Emma had done it. Their brave, beautiful little girl had faced her monster and named him. Marcus Webb stared at the table, knowing his fate was sealed. The truth had finally, powerfully been spoken. The jury filed out of Courtroom 3B at 2:47 p.m. on that Wednesday afternoon. 12 ordinary citizens, a retired teacher, a mechanic, a store manager, a nurse, and 8 others, carried the weight of Emma Martinez's testimony with them into the deliberation room. Some had tears in their eyes. Others wore expressions of steely determination. All of them understood that this wasn't just about stolen jewelry or a broken window. This was about a child's stolen innocence. Emma didn't stay to hear the verdict. Dr. Chen had recommended that the little girl be taken home immediately after her testimony, spared the additional stress of waiting in the courthouse. Rosa had carried her granddaughter out through a side exit, shielding her from the reporters who'd gotten wind of the emotional proceedings. Maria and Carlos had followed, Emma already asleep on her father's shoulder, exhausted from the ordeal of finally breaking her silence. "Will she be okay?" Carlos had asked Dr. Chen in the hallway before leaving. The psychologist had smiled genuine hope in her eyes for the first time in months. "She spoke, Carlos. After 6 months of silence, she found her voice. That's not just progress, that's a breakthrough. The healing has begun." Now, 90 minutes later, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation as people filtered back in. Word had spread through the courthouse that the jury was returning, remarkably fast for a criminal case. Defense attorney Robert Kleinman loosened his tie, perspiring despite the air conditioning. He'd done what he could, but he knew. They all knew. Marcus Webb sat rigidly at the defense table, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. His hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together. For the first time since his arrest, genuine fear showed in his eyes. A 3-year-old child had dismantled his entire defense with 10 minutes of testimony. Detective Sarah Mason sat in the gallery with Bailey at her feet, the golden retriever's head resting on her boot. She'd seen this moment before, had been present for 9 previous cases where Bailey had helped children testify. Each verdict felt personal, but this one especially so. She remembered finding Emma in that closet, the child's eyes wide and empty with shock. And today, she'd watched that same little girl point at her attacker and reclaim her voice. "Good boy," Mason whispered, scratching behind Bailey's ears. "You did good, buddy." Assistant District Attorney James Thornton sat at the prosecution table, his closing argument still echoing in his mind. He'd kept it simple, direct. Marcus Webb broke into the Martinez home. His fingerprints prove it. His blood proves it. His possession of stolen property proves it. But most importantly, the brave testimony of 3-year-old Emma Martinez proves it beyond any reasonable doubt. She looked evil in the face and named it. The defense would have you believe a child that young can't be trusted, can't remember accurately. But you saw her up there. You heard the specific details she provided, details that match every piece of physical evidence we presented. That little girl told you the truth. Now it's your turn to speak the truth through your verdict. The jury had listened with unwavering attention, several members nodding along with his words. "All rise," the bailiff announced, snapping everyone to attention. Judge Patricia Morrison entered, her expression carefully neutral. She'd presided over hundreds of trials, but something about this one had gotten under her professional armor. The image of Emma clutching that therapy dog while facing her trauma would stay with her forever. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Morrison asked as she took her seat. The foreman, a middle-aged woman who managed a local bookstore, stood. Her hands didn't shake as she held the verdict form. "We have, Your Honor." "The defendant will rise." Marcus Webb stood slowly, Kleinman rising beside him. The defendant's jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek. This was the moment where his fate would be sealed, freedom or prison, vindication or condemnation. In the matter of the state of Ohio versus Marcus Webb, on the charge of burglary in the first degree, how do you find? The bookstore manager's voice rang clear and strong through the courtroom. "We find the defendant guilty." The word guilty seemed to hang in the air, reverberating off the wooden panels, echoing in every corner. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the courtroom exploded. Maria Martinez, watching via video conference from home with Emma asleep upstairs, collapsed into Carlos's arms, her sobs of relief so powerful her whole body shook. Carlos held her tightly, his own tears falling silently, the weight of 6 months of anguish finally lifting from his shoulders. In the courtroom, spectators gasped and whispered. Lily Portman, the teenage babysitter who'd carried guilt for not protecting Emma better, cried openly in her mother's embrace. Other victims of burglaries who'd come to watch, people who'd followed the case in the news, nodded in satisfaction. Marcus Webb's face went ashen. His knees buckled slightly, and Kleinman had to grip his arm to keep him upright. The defendant who'd been so cocky, so certain that a child's testimony wouldn't hold up, now faced the reality of his conviction. "On the charge of theft, how do you find?" Judge Morrison continued. "Guilty, Your Honor." "On the charge of criminal trespass?" "Guilty." "On the charge of endangering a child?" That one hit differently. It wasn't just about the crime. It was about what he'd done to Emma's life, to her sense of safety, to her ability to speak. "Guilty, Your Honor." Webb's lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder, but the defendant shrugged it off roughly. His carefully maintained composure shattered completely. "This is bullshit," he muttered, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "A kid's fairy tale shouldn't." "Mr. Webb," Judge Morrison's voice cracked like a whip, "you will remain silent or you will be removed from this courtroom." Webb clamped his mouth shut, but his eyes burned with impotent rage. The bailiff moved closer, hand resting on his handcuffs, ready for any outburst. Judge Morrison thanked the jury for their service, then turned her attention to sentencing. "Mr. Webb, you have been found guilty on all counts. Given the severity of your crimes, particularly the lasting psychological damage inflicted on a 3-year-old child, I am sentencing you to 5 years in the Ohio Department of Corrections, with no possibility of parole for the first 2 years." 5 years. It wasn't life, but it was justice. It was acknowledgement that what he'd done mattered, that Emma's trauma mattered, that breaking into a home and terrorizing a child had real consequences. As the bailiff approached with handcuffs, Webb finally showed genuine emotion. Not remorse. He never apologized, never acknowledged the harm he'd caused, but fear. The reality of prison time crashed over him like a wave. "Your Honor, I'd like to request," Kleinman began, but Morrison cut him off. "Your client's time for requests has passed, Counselor. Bailiff, take Mr. Webb into custody." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the courtroom. Marcus Webb was led away through the side door, his future now measured in prison years rather than freedom. He didn't look back, didn't acknowledge anyone. He simply disappeared through the door, removed from society, unable to hurt any more children. Detective Mason stood, and Bailey rose with her. They walked into the hallway where other officers congratulated her on the conviction, but Mason deflected the praise. "It wasn't me," she said firmly. "It was Emma. That little girl showed more courage in 10 minutes than most people show in a lifetime. And Bailey," she looked down at her golden partner, "he just reminded her that the world still had good in it, that not everything was scary." Bailey's tail wagged as if he understood every word. 3 hours later, Maria and Carlos received the call from Thornton. "He's been sentenced. 5 years. Emma's testimony made all the difference." Carlos hung up and looked at his wife, then up at the ceiling where their daughter slept peacefully for the first time in months. "She did it, Maria. Our baby girl looked at the monster and took away his power." "She had help," Maria smiled through her tears. "She had a very good dog." Upstairs, Emma slept with her window cracked open, the spring breeze rustling her curtains. No nightmares visited her that night. For the first time since March, she dreamed of butterflies and sunshine and a golden dog who'd shown her that courage was just another word for love. Justice had been served. The healing could truly begin. 6 months had passed since that pivotal day in Courtroom 3B. Spring had given way to summer, summer to fall, and now autumn leaves danced across the Martinez family's backyard in shades of gold and crimson. The date was October 15th, Emma's 4th birthday, and the house on Maple Street was filled with something it hadn't known in over a year: pure, unbridled joy. Pink and purple balloons bobbed against the ceiling. A Princess Castle cake sat on the dining room table, 4 candles waiting to be lit. Children's laughter echoed through the rooms where silence had once reigned. But the guest of honor, aside from Emma herself, wore fur and a bow tie. Bailey sat in the center of the backyard, surrounded by adoring children, his tail wagging so hard his entire back end wiggled. He wore a special bow tie for the occasion, blue with gold stars, and a bandana that read Emma's hero in glittery letters. Detective Sarah Mason stood nearby, watching her partner work his magic, spreading joy to every child who came near. Emma emerged from the house wearing a sparkly dress and a tiara that sat slightly crooked on her dark curls. The moment she saw Bailey, her face lit up with the kind of pure happiness that made every adult present fight back tears. This was the Emma they remembered, the chatty, joyful little girl who'd been buried under trauma for so long. "Bailey," Emma shrieked, running across the grass with her arms outstretched. The golden retriever's tail went into overdrive as Emma crashed into him, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "You came to my birthday. Mommy said you might be working, but you came." Mason smiled, kneeling down beside them. "Bailey wouldn't miss your birthday for anything, Emma. He's been looking forward to it all week." Emma kissed the top of Bailey's head repeatedly, giggling when he licked her cheek. "I missed you so much. I tell everyone about you, about how you helped me be brave." And she had. Emma talked about Bailey constantly, to her preschool classmates, to her therapist, to anyone who would listen. The golden retriever had become part of her healing story, proof that even in the darkest moments, goodness existed. Maria Martinez watched from the porch, Carlos's arm around her waist. Their daughter spoke freely now, her vocabulary expanding daily, making up for lost time. The nightmares still came occasionally, but they were growing less frequent. Emma was reclaiming her childhood piece by piece. "Thank you," Maria said to Mason, who joined them on the porch. "For everything, for Bailey, for not giving up on her." Mason shook her head. "Emma did the hard work, she found her voice. Bailey and I, we just showed up." "Sometimes showing up is everything," Carlos said quietly, watching Emma play with Bailey and the other children. His daughter was teaching her friends how to gently pet the therapy dog, demonstrating the confidence she'd built over the past months. The party continued with games and presents, but the highlight came when Emma insisted on sharing her birthday cake with Bailey. She carefully selected a piece with extra frosting and, with Mason's permission, held it out for the golden retriever. Bailey took it delicately, his gentle nature evident in every movement. "Bailey gets the biggest piece because he's the bestest friend," Emma declared to her assembled guests. "He saved me when I was really, really scared. He's a hero dog." As the afternoon wore on and parents began collecting their children, Mason prepared to leave as well. But Emma ran over, tugging on the detective's sleeve. "Can Bailey come visit me again, please? He makes me feel safe." Mason exchanged glances with Emma's parents, then smiled. "Actually, Emma, I have some good news. Because you were so brave, and because Bailey helped you so much, other people decided that more dogs like Bailey should help kids. The courthouse is getting 3 new therapy dogs, and they're starting a program where kids who have been through scary things can visit with the dogs for therapy sessions." Emma's eyes went wide. "Really? More dogs like Bailey?" "More good dogs to help more brave kids," Mason confirmed. "And you know what else? Your mommy and daddy have been talking to lots of people about how important it is to help kids who witness crimes. They're helping to change the rules so more kids can have support like you had." It was true. The Martinez family had become unlikely advocates for trauma-informed court practices. Maria had spoken at county commission meetings. Carlos had shared their story with the state legislature. They'd partnered with organizations working to implement courthouse facility dog programs across Ohio. Emma's case had become a catalyst for change, proving that with the right support, even the most traumatized children could find their voices. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Emma sat on the back steps with Bailey's head in her lap. Detective Mason sat beside them, and Maria and Carlos joined from the other side. For a moment, everyone was quiet, just being present in the peace of the moment. "Bailey," Emma said softly, stroking his golden fur, "when I grow up, I want to help scared kids like you helped me. I'm going to tell them that even when really bad things happen, there's still good things too. Like you, like nice police ladies, like mommies and daddies who hug you really tight." Mason felt tears prick her eyes. "I think you're already helping, Emma. By being brave, by speaking up, you helped make sure the bad man couldn't scare any other little girls. That's pretty amazing for someone who just turned 4. Emma considered this seriously, then nodded. "Being brave is hard, but Bailey made it easier. Can I tell you a secret?" She leaned close to the dog's ear and whispered, though everyone could hear, "You're my very best friend in the whole world." Bailey's tail thumped against the steps, and he turned to lick Emma's face, making her dissolve into giggles. The sound of pure childhood joy, untainted by fear. That night, after all the guests had left and Emma was tucked into her bed, a new bed in a newly redecorated room, free from memories of that terrible night, Maria found a drawing Emma had made. It showed a little girl holding hands with a golden dog under a bright yellow sun. Across the top, in Emma's careful preschool handwriting with several letters backward, it read, "Me and Bailey. He helped me be brave." Maria pressed the drawing to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Her daughter had survived. More than survived, she was thriving. The silence that had held Emma captive for 6 months had been broken by compassion wrapped in golden fur. In courthouses across Ohio, 3 new therapy dogs were being trained, each one prepared to follow in Bailey's pawprints. Legislation was being drafted to expand trauma-informed practices for child witnesses. Emma's story, the story of a 3-year-old who pointed at a police dog and found her voice, was changing the system. But for Emma Martinez, sleeping peacefully with Bailey's picture on her nightstand and a new butterfly nightlight casting gentle shadows on her walls, the lesson was simpler. Even after the darkest night, morning always comes. Even after the worst fear, love remains. Even when words are lost, they can be found again. Sometimes all it takes is a good dog, a moment of courage, and the reminder that you're never alone in the darkness. Emma's silence had fallen, but her voice, strong, clear, and unafraid, had risen to take its place.